Right now, 42% of Americans have less than $1,000 saved, but there is a specific biological shift that happens the second you cross that line. Your bank balance operates as an active biological variable. It dictates exactly how your brain processes fear, calculates risk, and perceives time itself. Once you get slightly past that initial $1,000 threshold, you hit a specific psychological trap. Let's call it the comfortable broke plateau. This bar chart shows the distribution of personal savings. The median American sits tightly clustered right here. Meanwhile, way out on the right edge, only 14% ever cross the $100,000 mark. People stay clustered in that middle block for a decade, even with a great salary. They stay there because they don't realize their current account balance is secretly dictating their decision-making machinery. We can break this down into specific phases. First is survival mode, spanning from $0 to $1,000. Living in this band imposes a literal tax on your cognitive bandwidth. Researchers found persistent financial stress reduces capacity, a cognitive tool comparable to losing 13 IQ points. If you have $400, paying $120 today to prevent a $600 problem later doesn't register. Your brain only asks, does spending $120 mean missing rent Friday? Advising someone in this phase to think long-term completely misses the reality of the situation. Their brain actively filters every choice through immediate threat detection. Choosing the short-term option is a biologically rational decision under those conditions. Once you save a modest emergency buffer, you enter the security shift, roughly $1,000 to $10,000. The immediate stress fades. You stop calculating your life in days and start calculating in weeks. This graph maps why this phase traps people. As savings reach a $7,000 cushion, the daily dread of poverty plummets to near zero. It feels like winning. But look at momentum. Because the pain signal is gone, that $7,000 sits idle for a decade. Taking a portion of that safe money and moving it into investments triggers intense friction. To the part of your brain still running threat detection, giving up cash feels exactly like returning to the danger you just escaped. Think about your own savings right now. Can you articulate the exact reason that specific number is right for your long-term goals? Or did you stop saving when the fear went away? Breaking this inertia requires a redirection protocol. Once your emergency fund covers 3 to 6 months of expenses, cap it. Open a separate account at a completely different bank, give it a different name, and physically separate every single surplus dollar. The plateau breaks through physical, deliberate separation of those accounts. That boundary forces a conscious override of your brain's natural desire to passively blend all your money into one comfortable safety net. Breaking out pushes you into phase 3, confidence. Spanning roughly $10,000 to $100,000, this is where compound interest moves from a textbook concept to a mathematical reality you can feel. This compounding chart visualizes self-efficacy. Invest $10,000 at a 7% return, it passively generates $700. At $50,000, it generates $3,500 a year, requiring zero labor. This independent momentum provides the psychological license to take calculated career risks without threatening your foundation. The relief you felt back in phase 2 was the absence of fear. The confidence in phase 3 is a rational reaction to actively witnessing your own capital doing the work for you. That visible evidence allows you to absorb risks safely. There is a massive difference between deliberately choosing your financial baseline and remaining blindly trapped by the mere absence of fear. Here is the framework. Scarcity operates as a tax on your bandwidth. Security removes the fear, but stalls your action. Physically isolating your funds is the only mechanism that forces momentum. Once you establish momentum, you move beyond confidence. With phase 4, the acceleration. This is where money stops being a byproduct of your labor and becomes a second, self-sustaining income stream entirely on its own. We are going to look at the exact math that makes this happen. The goal of these final phases is specific: to systematically replace daily financial fear with absolute choice, no matter where your bank account currently stands. But understanding the psychology of wealth won't help you without execution. By the end of this session, you will have exactly one frictionless action to take, a specific step mathematically designed to pull you out of your current financial plateau. Let's start with the math that defines the acceleration phase. relying on a standard average annual market return of 7%. At $100,000 invested, a 7% return creates $7,000 a year without extra labor. When principal reaches $300,000, that return scales up, providing a reliable $21,000. And hitting the peak of Phase 4 at $500,000, the portfolio generates $35,000 a year in completely passive income. Think about that number in context. In many regions across the United States, that $35,000 mark sits very close to the median individual income. You've built a yield that rivals or exceeds what a substantial share of full-time workers take home from an entire year of labor. This specific threshold is critical because it reveals exactly when the financial weight of your livelihood moves off your day job and directly onto your portfolio. For most people, this structural shift happens long before they consciously realize it. Behavioral economists describe this shift through a concept called locus of control. In the early phases of wealth building, your safety is tied to a single external source, your employer. In Phase 4, an independent internal financial structure exists, one that functions whether you keep working that specific job or not. That independence changes the quiet internal monologue playing in your head. The anxious thought, "I need this job," gradually becomes a much calmer realization, "I choose this job." Let's watch how this plays out in the real world. Imagine two employees dealing with the exact same toxic manager, sitting through the identical unfair performance review. The Phase 2 employee with $15,000 saved absorbs unfair feedback silently because the job is their entire financial floor. The Phase 4 employee with a $250,000 portfolio pushes back assertively. A genuine alternative exists, drastically lowering their risk. The job hasn't changed, the leverage has. And leverage dictates human behavior, even when never explicitly weaponized out loud. This newfound confidence comes with a specific behavioral risk unique to this stage, something known as the house money effect. Watch this portfolio climb from $180,000 to $240,000. The danger hits when investors mentally separate that $60,000 of growth, viewing it as the market's money. This illusion makes those gains feel disposable, encouraging dangerously riskier bets. Every single dollar in that account holds identical risk, making unchecked overconfidence the most expensive threat at the specific scale. Once you secure those gains and protect them from your own overconfidence, you cross the final threshold into Phase 5, optionality. This represents a net worth roughly between $500,000 and $1 million. This tier completely flips the underlying question behind every choice. You stop asking, "What do I need?" and finally begin asking, "What do I want?" Someone operating in Phase 5 evaluates a job offer on completely different criteria. They look at whether the work itself is engaging, whether the people are decent, and whether the schedule fits their life. Survival metrics like salary and stability are no longer the deciding variables because their financial floor is already secure. Researchers studying subjective well-being have documented something interesting about this wealth tier. The mechanism that drives continued happiness here shifts entirely away from consumption, buying more things, and moves squarely into autonomy, which is the control over how your time gets spent. To see the difference, let's look at two individuals who both reach a $700,000 net worth, but choose radically different paths forward. The first person spends their wealth on visible upgrades, like a larger house and luxury car, operating on old survival-era confidence. The second person instead negotiates a 4-day workweek, gaining unstructured time to spend with their family. The data on autonomy is highly consistent here. The second path, buying back time rather than accumulating goods, generates significantly higher, longer-lasting life satisfaction. That is the ultimate lesson of Phase 5. It is not defined by the material goods a person can afford to buy. It is defined entirely by the obligations they no longer have to fulfill. Looking at this entire progression, the actual dollar amount in your bank account was never really the point. The number is just a proxy for how much of your daily decision-making is run by fear versus how much is run by choice. Do not try to skip phases, and do not attempt a massive, unsustainable overnight life overhaul. That is a recipe for stalling out entirely. Instead, identify your current phase based on the mathematical thresholds we walked through. rather than where you wish you were. The most common place people get trapped is right here, the comfortable broke plateau, sitting in the gap between phase 2 and phase 3. If that is where you are, here is my exact singular action required this week. Open a separate bank account today and redirect the very first dollar past your emergency fund threshold directly into it. You don't need a sudden burst of motivation. Taking this one frictionless, highly specific action is the only proven mechanism to restart your financial momentum and move up the ladder.